everyone. Welcome to the ITL's Network Stikeman series. My name is Sanjana Arora, and I'm the Director of Media and Publicity and your host. Today, we have with us Wesley. He's the Head of Technology Group and Chair of Diversity and Inclusion Committee in the Toronto office of Stikeman Elliott. His practice focuses on information technology, e-commerce, biotechnology transactions, as well as privacy-related matters, including compliance with Canada's new anti-spam litigation. With that, I would like to hand it over to Wesley to tell us a little about himself and his journey in the legal profession.
It kind of came in waves, right? So initially, as I mentioned, there's a corner office partner that thought I was a technology whiz because I was able to copy people on an email. Kind of ages me. But then when you actually deal with the issues, I really enjoy the issues. And one of the things that I also loved about technology is that it's constantly evolving. So it's never, sorry, Alexa's picking up our conversation in the background. It's never the same issue. And sometimes, I might appreciate it being the same issue, just to be able to utilize precedent a little bit more often. But it kind of always keeps you on your toes. And one of the things I really enjoyed about it is when I started, there weren't a lot of diverse lawyers on Bay Street. And so the great thing about technology is it's very objective. Does this person understand? Does this person not understand? It tends to be, at least in my experience, it tended to be less based on relationships. It's not that I have this great relationship with this investment banker who's doing a new deal and that person's going to hand me down a transaction. It was more, I've done a transaction with a client, the client feels that it really understands the issues, and they're going to extend me another opportunity to work with them. So I loved that. There's no old boys network in technology. I also kind of love the fact that because everything is new and evolving, the case law, the legislation, it was a starting point for everybody. So the thing about being at Stikeman Elliott is sometimes you feel like you're the most junior person in the room. Majority of times that's true. So you'd be on transactions where people, I'd be a junior lawyer and there'd be someone who was, 20 years in going against me. And in many ways, technology had a very level playing field because you might have been practicing for 20 years, but these issues are novel to both you and to me. And I love that.
That sounds really interesting. Also, coming to the other role, which is the chair of DNI Committee. Could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of also touches on technology too, because I did mention, the technology, it tends to be a more diverse bar, one that I thought was more inclusive, and one that I really enjoyed because even the clientele. So when you work with the clients, most of my clients tend to be very diverse across the spectrum. That's something that I've always been concerned about. And in, I think in 2002, we had a very diverse group of incoming articling students. And those articling students were approaching myself and two other associates who were from diverse communities to talk, ask questions. And the three associates were all very close. We still are very, very close. And we started talking amongst ourselves and realized, oh, wait a minute, all of these diverse students have the same issues. We should talk to them. And so I had engaged with them and then thought, you know what, this is probably something that the bar is changing. We better take a more strategic direction when it comes to diversity, because if you don't embrace diversity, you're going to be left behind. That is Ontario, right? That is Canada. So if we don't embrace diversity, we're going to have a paucity of talent to draw from. And really, we've always wanted the best and brightest, and the best and brightest means the best and brightest. It doesn't matter their background, it doesn't matter if they're the way that they culturally identify, it doesn't matter about their sexual orientation, it's truly objective standards. So we basically working on diversity initiatives since 2002, both in terms of our recruiting materials, as well as how we hire, and then more in terms of, more recently in terms of, retention, and then obviously partnership. And so as the chair, basically we deal with all of those issues.
Right. So how does Toronto's Diversity and Inclusion Committee work together with the national program that the firm may have?
So we work hand in hand with the national committee. I can say the great thing about Toronto is we are far more diverse, and we've got more diversity amongst our diversity. Whereas, when you go to in different regions in Canada, they might have some diversity, but the diversity tends to be skewed in one way or another. We in Toronto have everything. So it's a nice kind of, central place to maybe roll out initiatives or try out initiatives and then roll them out nationally. But we definitely work hand in hand with the National Committee, and we also work closer with, committees in some of the larger offices like Montreal.
We did speak with the members of the DNI committee at other offices, and it's really good to hear that the firm comes together and everything that happens on a global basis. So what trends are you seeing in the technology practice space, and what was the most interesting matter that you've worked on in the last few years, if you can disclose it, of course?
Oh yeah, there's so many things I cannot disclose. Changes. There are tons of changes. It's hard for me to identify them as changes because I see them before it happens. Like, I've been doing AI for a decade, machine learning for a decade, but now you're seeing them deployed in ways that are far more operational rather than strategic. There was a big, years ago, there were very large scale outsourcings where people would outsource whole portions of their business. Now it's far more strategic. A lot of those didn't necessarily work. I would say one of the relatively recent things that I worked on, which I can talk about but not mention names, is I unwound a $1 billion outsourcing, which was a global outsourcing, and that was really interesting because of first you're unwinding a global service arrangement that had inputs everywhere in the world. So things like trying to figure out, well, okay, the company who decided to outsource these services got out of, let's say, Mozambique. They got out of Mozambique because they no longer need to provide services there. But when they're actually repatriating these services, how are they going to service their operations in Mozambique? It's not possible to do it from South Africa, for example. And then the movement of computers and infrastructure across borders in different countries, certainly in Africa, even in provinces or states and other countries, sometimes entails massive payments. So it was extraordinarily complicated. A lot of fun. We worked for months working with the service provider, trying to figure out, not just based on the services, but even based on the locations, how we would do things. And then, of course, we try and do it. Tax would come back and say, it's going to be too expensive. Figure something else out.
This all sounds really interesting, and I'm sure we can have like another youth session for this. So back to your role as the chair of Diversity and Inclusion Committee in Toronto, what kind of programs or initiatives does the firm have in place with respect to the outreach to the public or potential lawyers? Oh,
yeah, that's a great question. So we started a relationship with an organization called Pathways to, what is Pathways? Pathways to Success? I probably should have looked, but Pathways. Back when it was centered in Regent Park. So I was talking to you a little bit about how we established the Diversity Committee in 2002, 2003. One of the things that we thought we needed to do was help diversify the pool, the talent pool. So we wanted to try and encourage people to enter into the law stream at an early age. And so we had a number of programs, but the one that's kind of lasted the longest was our Pathways Education, that's what it's called, is our relationship with Pathways to Education. So at the time it was based solely in Regent Park. We reached out to them and created a relationship where we brought in high school students in grade 11. And we take them on a tour of the Stikeman offices, introduce them to lawyers and other professionals within Stikeman who often came from similar backgrounds. And what we were trying to do is normalize Bay Street to these people that are, growing up in Regent Park, which at the time was one of the largest housing projects in North America. Normalize them to the Bay Street environment and let them realize that this was a potential for them and that there are people there that support them. So we bring them in, have, given them pizza, talk to them about our experiences. They were, very, very enthusiastic. Always wanted to know what cars we drove. And we actually hired them too. So we had 1 to 2 spaces every summer where we would pull in a student from, there were 6 schools that service Regent Park. So 1 or 2 students from the 6 schools, we'd pull in as summer students. And so they would work with us, and invariably they were always the best rated student, because those were the people that were the most motivated. They loved the environment. They loved meeting people. And we've actually worked with a number of the graduates from Pathways to get not just to university, but to get into law school, to get into medical school. We've mentored them. We've actually hired a graduate from Pathways to Education. They articled with us. They worked with us as a lawyer. So we've had a lot of success with that program. And it's really done what it intended to do, which was help divert a stream of people into the law.
Yeah, and I think it's good to start so early, and it's great to hear that Stikeman has such initiatives. So how can students make better connections at the firm while working remotely? What are some things which Stikeman does to make sure that their lawyers, even students, feel included, even if they're working remotely, particularly in the Toronto office?
So it is difficult, right? It is hard because you're not just one office from your colleague. But we have a lot of different support groups that are intended to help. So and now there's a little bit of it, because it's kind of a hybrid, right? Now people can actually get together. So one of the things, for example, that I did the second we could start meeting people is I met with all of the diverse students for lunch. I've met them a couple times now for lunch. But starting in, I guess it was February, is when the restaurants opened and we could actually meet up. So even though most of us still aren't kind of going into the office regularly, we're still meeting up on the side, having lunch. There is an incoming student, and because she's incoming, and I was very concerned about her having, a network, I've been inviting her to a number of lunches that I'm going to. So, and she's been all over me to go for different lunches. There's a new Nigerian place that opened in Kensington Market, so shout out to that. And we were supposed to go there just before everything shut down. So as soon as everything opened, she emailed me and said, I thought we're going for Suya. I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll go for Suya. So that's kind of what we're doing. We have like a lot of mentorship programs, but the stuff that I do is informal, and we have a lot of informal get-togethers to encourage that kind of relationship building, those intangibles that are so important.
Right. So as we head towards the end of our episode, what are the last parting words of motivation that you would like to tell our ITLs to keep them going, even when the road seems difficult?
Yeah, I mean, we a lot of internationally trained lawyers do face an uphill battle because they come into Canada and people don't seem to really understand their credentials. What I would say is your background and your experience is your asset. That is a huge asset. And I think Canadians are starting to better appreciate that. I think, we are integrated into the world economy. It is very important from a diversity perspective to have a diversity of perspectives at a firm. And that doesn't just mean people with different sexual orientations, different colors, different backgrounds. It means people who have even been brought up in different cultures and have different insights into things. So I think you really need to focus on those as strengths and not think of them as weaknesses, because a lot of people say, well, yeah, I know I have all this experience, but not in the Canadian context. Ignore that, right? You have all this great experience, and it's different than all the competitors because it wasn't in the Canadian context, which I think adds a huge amount of value. So I would say, number one, focus on your strengths because you absolutely have them, and number two, network like crazy. It is so important to meet people, and there's so many people in the legal profession who are incredibly supportive of the international bar and the international community. And so, whether it's within your own community or outside of your community, really network and meet as many people as possible. And you may send emails or try and do LinkedIn messages and not receive a response. It's because people are busy. Just keep hounding them. That's my advice. Maybe they'll come after you. But I find I inadvertently ignore so many emails because you only have so much time in the day. But if people are consistent, then I'll be like, okay, you know what? I was going to take out a bunch of people for lunch this day. Why don't you join us? And you'll meet not just myself, but all these other great lawyers who are now going to grow your network.
Thanks a lot, Wesley, for such amazing and candid advice for ITLs. And I'm sure we all learned a lot from this discussion. With that, we conclude our today's episode. And once again, thanks a lot, Wesley.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.